Good evening. On January the 3rd of this year, the United States military was involved in the sovereign territory of Venezuela. They entered it and left with the sitting head of state in custody. The administration called it Operation Absolute Resolve. They called it a demonstration of what the Trump administration's national security strategy and its 2026 national defense strategy now formally codify as a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. What analysts, though, and journalists in foreign capitals have started to call the Monroe Doctrine. For 200 years, the Caribbean has lived in the shadow of the Monroe Doctrine, the assertion that the Western Hemisphere falls within the strategic orbit of the United States. But tonight, many analysts believe we're entering a new phase. A phase where that doctrine is no longer just a warning to outside powers, but an assertion of active influence. For Jamaica, a country where remittances from the United States account for approximately 20% of our gross domestic product, where 40% of our exports go to one market, and where Chinese investment is woven into our infrastructure, this is not a foreign policy debate. It's a national survival question. Tonight, on Lead Story, the doctrine defined, Jamaica in the crosshairs, CARICOM's collective dilemma, and the question that this government must answer. Does Jamaica have a doctrine of its own? I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and this is Lead Story Prime. Joining us for this important discussion tonight, Jacqueline Charles, American journalist and Caribbean correspondent, Christoph Simpson, chairman of the Jamaica Left Alliance for National Democracy and Socialism, and attorney at law and columnist Jalil Dabdoob. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
I want to start off with Jacqueline Charles. She's online with us, talking to us here all the way from the United States. Jacqueline Charles, you were covering the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in St. Kitts last week. We're discussing the posture of the United States and the posture of Caribbean countries as well. What was the mood among Caribbean leaders about the United States' current posture towards the region?
Well, I think prior to the arrival of Secretary of State Marco Rubio, people were really kind of like on pins and needles. I mean, they did not know what to expect, what to say. We saw the opening ceremony. Prime Minister Andrew Holness laid it out in terms of having to take some decisions, especially in regards to Cuba, with courage. At the opening with Marco Rubio, what was interesting when we got the transcript, he did not mention Cuba. In his initial remarks, he talked about Venezuela, he talked about energy, he talked about the commonality with the United States and Caribbean, countries, but he stayed away. Then we later learned that privately, he basically told Caribbean leaders, listen, talk about something else other than Cuba. Let's not give them, any false hope. Discussions are underway. And me and my colleague, Nora Gamas-Torres, we broke the story that while Rubio was meeting with heads, his closest advisors were meeting with the grandson of Raul Castro, not far from where we were, basically on the same property.
So that was in Basse-Terre, St. Kitts, as the CARICOM 50th Heads of Government meeting took place. You just made mention of that meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, meeting with those regional leaders during the summit. We had at that meeting Prime Minister of Jamaica and the outgoing chair of CARICOM, Dr. Andrew Holness, the current chair, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Dr. Terence Drew, and two other regional leaders, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Kamla Persad-Bissessar, and the President of Guyana, Dr. Irfan Ali. All of these I name because these are all key figures in the dynamic. In the meeting with Rubio, what were the core issues discussed, particularly around security, migration, and regional stability, if Cuba was off the table?
Well, Cuba came up privately in another meeting. So he had several meetings. He had a couple of bilaterals, but in the initial meeting, when he walked into the room at around 12:30, where he just sort of laid out, his visit, he did not mention Cuba. And then later we understand that Cuba did come up. I mean, Cuba is very much on everybody's mind. We've seen the pressure campaign that the Trump administration has put out. They are saying that Cuba will fall any day now. We're waiting to see how and what does that look like. But Caribbean countries are in a very difficult position because the heads are one place and the population is someplace else. The population can talk to you about their personal experience with Cuban doctors or Cuban teachers, with the impact studying in Cuba. You have Prime Minister Drew, who spent 7 years in Cuba. He's a doctor. So it's a very difficult position that the region is in right now, especially in regard to the relationship with Havana.
Well, that's certainly something that we'll be watching as we continue to figure out where Jamaica then and the rest of the Caribbean navigates throughout this experience. But Jalil Dabdoo, we have you here on panel with us, an attorney at law and as a columnist. We're watching this situation where the Monroe Doctrine, something that had been put in place by former President of the United States, James Monroe, 200 plus years ago, is something that has defined the relationship between Washington and the rest of the region. This idea that they wanted to keep the European powers out. It's a keep out sign saying don't come to this region. You had the Roosevelt corollary to that in the 1930s that said, listen, former President Theodore Roosevelt saying in the United States, not only are we saying keep out to European powers, we're also saying to them, listen, we will be in charge in our backyard. That's what they called it. The idea that they were then able to do interventions in places like Haiti and Grenada. Now we have what some are calling the Monroe Doctrine, a compendium or a portmanteau of the words Monroe and Donald, President of the United States, Donald Trump. All of that to say there seems to be a shift now with President Donald Trump being much more aggressive in the region. When you hear this idea of sphere of influence and the kind of control that might involve, do those doctrines have any legal standing, or are the rest of us just supposed to ignore it?
Well, in my view, any doctrine that any country formulates can only have legal standing if it complies with international law. You refer to the Monroe Doctrine, etc. Those doctrines were pre-World War II.
And pre the establishment of Jamaica.
Right. When there were colonies, most of the British and most of the Caribbean became independent in the 60s coming forward. Latin America throughout various periods from the late 17, early 1800s, I think. But any doctrine, any country which wishes to abide by in its foreign policy, that is that country's sovereign right. The difficulty that we will have is when that sovereign right is exercised in a manner which is contrary to international law. Now, in my humble view, there is nothing wrong with a country exerting its influence in different areas of the world. Relationships can be built, influence can be had, etc. Bottom line is, just like in a country where we are all obliged to comply with the law, states must comply with international law. Otherwise, you will have a breakdown of the international order, which is, I think, what many people are concerned about now. So, yes, states can have their own doctrines, they can have their own philosophies, anything they want to refer to it as, once it does not go beyond the ambit of the international law.
Unfortunately, I'm an international lawyer, and I've been having a really rough time over the past year and a half with the understanding of what the ambit of international law is and who is complying with what. Christoph Simpson, as president of LAND, from a Caribbean political perspective, because we're looking here now at a region that has very little power, but is now subject to a lot of forces. Do you see this as a new phase, this sort of control by the Americans or control by great powers, especially the competition in the region? Or is this a continuation of historical patterns that no matter what Jalil Dabdoo says, no matter what I believe as an international lawyer, the reality on the ground never bore out what we're talking about?
They're just fundamental laws, the universe operates. right? Laws that matter above all else are the laws of physics. And unfortunately, might is right. That's not me agreeing with the principle that might is right, but a stronger force will always overcome a weaker force. So we're at the mercy of larger forces that exist around us. Law, the establishment of a law, whether any local law or international law, is an attempt to establish some sense of predictability, some sense of what different actors should expect from each other. And that would mean that if you violate this law, then there could be some consequences to expect in turn, or something along those lines. Some idea that law should restrain everybody's behavior, each actor, whether a citizen in a country or a country within the international space. But we have seen, even since World War II, certain countries violate freely and openly international law. Prime Minister of Canada recently said it, Mark Carney, admitted that the West, Canada and its allies, the US and so on, in NATO and the EU, freely violate international law, and they pretended that international law was real and neutral up until a recent point when it benefited them. But it's becoming more and more obvious to everybody now.
And that is might not be benefiting them as it continues now to turn on them. Part of what Mark Carney said there at the meetings in Geneva, in Switzerland there. We'll take a break here inside Lead Story and come back, continuing to talk to our panel and figuring out where Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean stands here on Lead Story Prime.
What me do? What you do? Me go check me prostate.
No, seriously? Me nah do that.
Remember say that pops drop out from me now. Me have to take it serious. You can just do the blood test, you know. But better safe than sorry. So me do the full package. Plus the NHF card help pay for the PSA test. Biggs, you're 40, you know. The earlier, the better. Cause me know you still want fire on all cylinder.
NHF is here for health. NHF is here for you.
Every dream conquered is another dream game. I land and I fly again like a jet plane. Headed straight in your direction, 'cause I'm wiser, one step closer. I'm winning 'cause I work so hard. And the music keeps on playing, and the people them I say we are my show tonight.
Watagwan. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
Welcome back to Lead Story Prime. If great power competition is returning to the Caribbean, Jamaica finds itself in a unique position. The United States is our largest trading partner, and it's also the source of the majority of our remittance flows. It also remains a key security partner in the region. So to continue this conversation, we're joined by Jacqueline Charles, American journalist and Caribbean correspondent, Christophe Simpson, chairman of the Jamaica Left Alliance for National Democracy and Socialism, and attorney at law and columnist Jalil Dabdoob. Before the break, Christophe, you were talking to us about whether what we're seeing is brand new and we should stop acting brand new, or if it is a continuation of how great powers, including the United States, has dealt with the region over the years.
We certainly live in a new era. I mean, we have entirely new countries that never existed before. we established this international law thing. But there are certain things that have always remained. And when a political force is greater than another political force, and that can be a political force that wants to say, we want control of your resources, or we want the ability to deploy troops in this area. Another political force can be saying, no, our people don't approve of that, it carries risk for our people, and we don't approve of that, or it's against our interests. If the colonizer is more powerful and does certain things, the colonized will be colonized. It's an unfortunate reality that we live with, and we can oppose it, we can hold our principles, but we still have to accept reality for what it is. That doesn't mean that we don't have agency, though. The way the world is now, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere, especially in recent times. The US and Israel and certain other countries had been testing the waters for some time. They do certain things and they watch the international community reaction. They're not infallible, they're not all-powerful, there are faults. But they've done certain things and normalized certain things. We warned with the genocide in Gaza that Gaza is just a testing ground. And what they're doing, and the Colombian president warned as well, it's a demonstration of what will happen if you oppose certain forces. And it not only is it a warning, whatever they get away with there, they can't get away with anywhere else. And it wasn't taken so seriously until they started doing the strikes against the vessels in Caribbean waters. So now, I mean, Caribbean leaders have good reason to be afraid and cautious. You see, Andrew Holness has to be very careful in what he says. Bruce Golding came here and said it as well. He has more freedom to speak than the Prime Minister. So I just want to call to attention, not related to the exact topic or exact question you asked, but I want to call to attention some recent words by Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit.
Well, hold on that from Roosevelt Skerrit for a minute, because I want to pull in Jacqueline Charles here. Given that you've made reference now to what took place on the ground there in St. Kitts, very cautious statements there from some leaders. Jamaica's Prime Minister made statements that some said you could find no fault with, and still there was uproar in the United States. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, also made statements much more fiery there. But Jacqueline Charles, at the summit in St. Kitts, how much of the discussion was about the Caribbean's relationships with external powers? Because part of the concern that is being raised right now is that China is interwoven in many of the parts of the Caribbean, and other global actors like Russia are supportive of the region. There was any conversation there about how the U.S. might view that, especially with the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the ground?
The focus really was about U.S. Caribbean relationships, and we have to also look at the U.S. and what we have been hearing from the U.S. It's very interesting. Before Rubio took office, in his hearing, there was a lot of conversations about China. If you remember when Ramdin was running, there was a lot of talk about Suriname's relationship, and in fact, I wrote a story about how the first Trump administration helped Suriname to get out of this debt situation with China. But we're not hearing a lot in terms of China. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to come back, but I think that we also have to recognize that Secretary of State Marco Rubio did not need to come down to the region. They requested his presence last year. He did not come. Europe was there. Europe said to Caribbean leaders, hey, we're here. We still believe in climate change. We want you. But this year he showed up. And why did he show up? Because he also understands that despite the strikes, despite what happened in Venezuela, despite whatever they may have planned for Cuba, the Caribbean is there, CARICOM is there, and do you necessarily want the kind of backlash that you really can't handle? So I think that there is a recognition in this administration that you just can't go in and do whatever you want. Now, how leaders are going to react and come together, that's the challenge, for CARICOM today. Among the many questions and the issues, it's like, is this a time where you really have to be united, or do you each go your separate ways? But I think that we should not underestimate his presence.
Don't underestimate his presence, Jacqueline Charles, but some saw it as a pressure campaign with security cooperation here in the region really being terms that said work with us or fall out. Just today, President Donald Trump has said that he's willing to cut off ties with Spain by virtue of them not allowing 4 strikes from Spain in support of the war with Iran that was started by the U.S. and Israel, and now has Iran sending out retaliatory strikes. That sort of immediacy to his diplomacy, utilizing tariffs when dealing with third states when it comes to assisting Cuba, intervening in Venezuela, all of these things seem to be much more than just we are your friend and we've come down. For some, they saw it as make sure you're in line, Caribbean, and make sure you stay with us as we do this work. Is that an overreach for those who watch?
I think it is an overreach.
Okay.
I have to tell you, we spoke to leaders when they came out of that initial meeting, and I think going into that meeting, that's what they thought they were going to get, and we got the total opposite, that they were actually sort of very surprised that it wasn't this pressure campaign, stick with us or else. And so, and even when you look at the speech that Rubio gave, and then he had these bilateral meetings, they were like, 10, 15 minutes. We saw more pressure going into the CARICOM summit than we actually got out of the CARICOM summit. Now, will something change? I mean, has anything changed? Countries are still under partial travel ban. They are still signing these third-party agreements to allow asylum seekers from the U.S. to come there. But what we did not get, and what we did not certainly see with the Secretary of State's Rubio's meeting, was some sort of arm twisting with Caribbean leaders. And we would have heard from it because, there were people who would have spoken up and said that, even if it was just a whisper.
Let me pull in Jaleel Dabdoob and then Christoph Simpson on that, because Jaleel, from an international law perspective and just from a legal perspective, where's the line exist between diplomacy, hi, I showed up, we're all polite, I've said all the right things, and coercion when economic pressure is now applied, because you're seeing visas, restrictions on small Caribbean countries, the threat of tariffs and tariffs being imposed, something that the U.S. Supreme Court has had to deal with President Donald Trump, remittances coming from the United States, and them being our largest trading partner. Do you see a difference between diplomacy and the sort of coercion that can exist, even if you don't say a word, just by showing up, and with these examples that you have around the world, Cuba, Venezuela, now Iran, saying if you don't cooperate, you know what happens next?
Well, coercion is a form of diplomacy, discreet pressure. But I think the Caribbean, and more specifically Jamaica, we can protect and insulate ourselves and stand on strong legal grounds. Especially, we've been tethering and wavering with legal principles in the international arena, and that is dangerous because it comes into the local arena. This is something I firmly believe in. So what is the most basic thing we should be doing as a country to insulate ourselves? Fortifying our democracy. I don't think, as great a power of the US is, America is not inclined to interfere in countries that are strong democratically. They don't have that inclination. They will find other ways to try and interfere. But the first thing we should be doing is fortifying internally our democracy, making sure our systems and our procedures are tight, and insulating ourselves.
Spain is one of the strongest democracies on the planet. Today we heard President Donald Trump say that he's willing to cut off trade with them because they didn't agree with him. Is that something that perhaps in a former time with the U.S. administration that might have been the position, but currently now what we're dealing with might just throw that out the window?
It's possible. I mean, this administration seems to be using more coercive tactics, but the question which all countries will ultimately have to answer, and when you give a little on it, it gets worse and worse. Are you going to comply with international law? Now, I am not saying Jamaica or any member of CARICOM should go and be trying to ruffle the US feathers, but we need to take legal positions while still being a friend of the United States, and it's not impossible to do. We can't be in one situation in the world applying one law or applying the law in one manner. And then when it comes back home, we want to apply the same law in a different manner. That weakens our own standing in the international community to take positions. And I think that is the fundamental problem that CARICOM is facing, because a lot of the countries in CARICOM dithered on some of the issues that Christoph alluded to. And when the same issue comes back close to home, they start to take a different position. You can't want to apply law selectively depending on whether it's applied to your ally, your foe.
It's been argued that the European Union is doing just that. When it comes to Venezuela, for example, and Cuba and the interventions there, or Iran, the European Union has said, well, we will cooperate with you. When it comes to Greenland and the United States, indicating it's a strategic national interest for them to have control over Greenland and Panama, that is something entirely different. This is certainly something, though, that CARICOM, you said, has to look at. I'll talk to Christoph Simpson after the break about this, Jacqueline Charles, as well, as we continue to build out not only how Jamaica keeps itself safe, but how small islands like ours with major powers now having so much control over us all manage to do this. Let me take a quick break though here inside Lead Story Prime and come back to you, continuing our discussion about what Jamaica does next as we make our way through these choppy waters as the world fractures. Stay with us.
Watagwan. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yeah.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
Tune in to Lead Story, weekdays at 6 p.m. Hosted by Jody Ann Quarry.
Brought to you by
Horizon, a new loan product from Access Financial Services.
Every dream conquered is another dream gained. I land and I fly again like a jet plane. Headed straight in your direction, 'cause I'm wiser, one step closer. I'm winning 'cause I work so hard. And the music hits I play, and the people them I say we are my show tonight. Oh, what a feeling, don't stop dreaming. Keep on believing in the power of the feeling. Whatever you want, take a chance. Song in your heart, step in your dance. You got a spark, don't fit the dark, shine your lights on.
Start your journey with a Jane Bank Small Business Loan, with small business loans with as little as $10,000 and up to $4 million.
The time is 8:30.
We're continuing our discussion about what happens with Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean as we move through these new choppy waters. And we're moving on now to CARICOM's collective dilemma, because regional unity has long been a central idea of Caribbean diplomacy. But when global powers engage the region, the question is whether CARICOM can act collectively, or or whether states are dealt with individually. I'm here with Jacqueline Charles, Christophe Simpson, and Jalil Dabdoub to continue this conversation. Christophe, let me pull you in because when a small state, like the small states here in the Caribbean, are deeply connected to a major power like the United States economically through trade and remittances, especially, how much does independence really matter in foreign policy? How much space do they have to make their own rules?
Not much, and that's another sad reality. And how we can assess that is by looking history of this region, and even if we talk about Cuba, right? We were threatened in 2020, as in Jamaica was threatened with sanctions in 2020. Sanctions similar to what the US had put on Cuba and Venezuela. I don't think
When
Jamaica,
did that threat take place?
In 2020, it was Donald Tapio. It was in response to Jamaica.
Former US ambassador to Jamaica?
Yes, because there were some talks of Jamaica entering some 5G development with China. China being involved in development of 5G infrastructure in Jamaica.
And that's telecoms infrastructure that would have been in place here in Jamaica, with the United States saying that they thought 5G at the time had been unsafe. And also opened us up to Chinese influence.
Not even just influence. They had made some argument that it would become a security threat to them and that it would justify them completely cutting us off from their financial system, which means no more bank transactions, no more international bank transactions, and then people who have Visa and MasterCard in Jamaica, that wouldn't work out for them anymore. So we were threatened at that time, and if that sort of threat was carried out, Jamaica couldn't survive a week. And we look at certain measures that the Trump administration had instituted during the first term against Cuba, when they had cut off Western Union and done other things like that. Those things strangled the Cuban economy. Now, as I was saying earlier, power is power. And any political ideal has to recognize that power is power. What is democracy? Democracy is people's power. Democracy is when the people have the power. Now, if all people don't really have economic power, and a foreign country has a lot of economic leverage over our lives, meaning they can do things that can literally make us starve. And we've seen the US brag about starving other countries. If they can do that, then yes, we have to balance some things and be like, all right, if we do and say this, we might not actually have food on the shelves tomorrow. This is something
and remittances, for example, about 68% of them come from the United States, so that makes up about 20% of our GDP. So they'd be a significant force even in just that small area, not to deal with trade and these other things that we depend on for the United States.
If they decided that they wanted to even cut off remittances in some way, as they had done with Cuba before, that would harm our economy. But Jamaica has been in this spot before. You'll hear people on both sides in terms of the major political parties in Jamaica talking about the 70s in different ways, but both acknowledge that when Jamaica took certain stances in the 70s, we were punished for it, and we were punished economically. And a similar thing has happened in other countries in the region. So I do agree with the things that were said earlier, that strengthening our democracy would really insulate us from these things, because you have other forces that are going to try to subdue our entire people. In Chile, the US admitted that they took an approach to make the economy scream. In Cuba, in 1960, in the Mallory Memorandum, the US admitted that the Cuban government was popular, and the only way that they could get to alienate support for the government was to create hunger and desperation in Cuba. In Haiti, we saw the US go in 2004 and kidnap the president. 2 years before that, in 2002, they backed a coup in Venezuela that saw the Venezuelan president kidnapped. Not Maduro, the one before him, Chavez. They had kidnapped Chavez as well. And these were strong democratic projects. The Cuban Revolution was a popular mass project. If you look at the documentary, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, about Venezuela, you see people talking about the democratic project that was being built and how proud they were of it. And the US decided that, well, if this is going against our interest, then we won't allow it. In Chile, the specific words were, we cannot allow them to elect this person because we don't like this person.
Well, I think that is sobering for many people hearing what is going on. Jacqueline Charles, hearing now from Christophe as he has contextualized what it looks like. The Caribbean countries, really small. 0.1% of the US's GDP is the GDP of all of the Caribbean countries in CARICOM, including Guyana, that is having the single fastest growth of any country on the planet. From your coverage of CARICOM over the years, are regional leaders more effective when they negotiate as a bloc with the United States, or given that you talk one-on-one as independent countries, sometimes they get more room and leeway if they do it by themselves?
Well, let me just say a couple of things. I cover Haiti, and I'm just going to say it on the record. In 2004, there's a lot of debate and question about whether or not President Aristide was kidnapped. Not everybody agrees with how that went down. Let me just say this. One of the things that we heard from CARICOM last week is that countries are going to have to take positions that are of their national interest. What we see today in the region, you mentioned Guyana. For instance, Exxon is there. That's a U.S. company, but there's also Chinese interest. Is that the reason why we don't hear Washington making a big deal about, China's presence when they know that China is very much present in this region? You've spoken about remittances, 20% of GDP. I can tell you yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security has been putting out this tweet talking about Haitians and how much money Haitians in the United States are sending back to Haiti, and how that is a bad thing, as if this is free money when this is money that they like everybody else from the Caribbean and any other immigrant, they're working for, and we all thought that they had a right to do what they wanted with their money, but DHS is making it seem like it is a crime that this money is going back into the region. We saw with Trump 1 that there was a divide and conquer. Remember the famous meeting at Mar-a-Lago where there was a handful of Caribbean leaders who were invited,
including Jamaica,
not.
and that started a lot of consternation here in Jamaica and across the region that we were being pulled away. Now we have the meeting this week where only the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and the President of Guyana are now invited to the United States to meet with President Donald Trump. Is that similar? Is that different?
Well, it's a little different. That is a meeting mostly of Latin American countries, and I can tell you, I asked to be part of the press pool, and I was not invited to be part of the press pool, on that meeting. So, it's basically Latin American countries. But
Jacqueline Charles, hold on. Those are two Caribbean countries that have oil. Trinidad and Guyana. The rest of us, some would argue, not useful to the United States because we don't have the thing that they're looking after for and going after now. Categorically something that President Donald Trump says is important. We don't have any proven oil reserves just yet.
Listen, we're still trying to figure out this meeting and what it's about, other than the fact that we see a lot of, in terms of Latin American countries, Argentina that are close to, President Trump. So I think there's more to come there. I think that honestly, that Caribbean leaders are in a very tight spot. They are going to have to be smart, right? We look at Grenada and what happened. He was asked about the radar, and last week we were joking, is he back from Africa yet? So by the time they actually came up with a response, the U.S. already put the radar, in Tobago. But I want to go back to Trinidad. When you look at the reaction in the region to her speech and what she said,
and that's Kamla Persad-Bissessar, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, yes.
How that was received versus what the reaction was with Prime Minister Holness. This is the problem that we have today. So the U.S. has this one rhetoric. They have one way of doing things. And then in the region, you have your constituents because you have to go to an election. Are the Caribbean people in these respective countries and together, are they on the same, wavelength as the Trump administration as the United States? Or are they with their leaders? And also, I am from the region, I'm from Turks and Caicos. Are we willing to give up our U.S. visas? Right now, that seems to be the push in a lot of this, with these leaders. They are trying to be diplomatic. They are trying to find some sort of working ground. Right now, a lot of the pressure isn't on us. Okay, the visa, the third party, but we don't have the guns blasted at us just yet. How long can they continue to maneuver and navigate this? And can they find common ground as regional leaders to go to the administration and says, okay, you're asking me to do this, but this is not going to work. I will tell you, I saw this a lot in Haiti with Brene Preval. I mean, this was always the tension in his relationship with the United States, where, you know, American ambassadors, State Department, they were always forcing or wanting him to do certain things as president. And he would say, wait a minute, no, that's not my priority. My priority is getting rid of drug traffickers. I need this, I need that. And what we saw, you know, after the earthquake, well, he was, you know, they were done with Preval, and we know how that story goes.
Well, that is sobering once again, because we're seeing then not only the space that we have to navigate, but what it might mean for various Caribbean countries as they have interactions with the United States. Jalil Abdul, Prime Minister Holness, though, was referenced several times in the speech made by Kamla Persad-Bissessar there in St. Kitts during the 50th CARICOM Heads of State meeting. And he said, unity, not uniformity. In the legal framework, though, that we're looking at for CARICOM and the idea of this sort of regional integration, do we need to have a common foreign policy? Should we push for a common foreign policy when dealing with a superpower like the United States, where we are so tiny? Should we have a single position, or do what's best for your people as quickly as you can?
Well, I think if you follow in Christoph's logic, unity is strength. So it would be, in my view, best if the Caribbean community would come together with a unified position. There will be times, and I think Mr. Holness alluded to it, there will be times when each country may have a slightly different view. But in terms of general principles on how to deal with, for example, the superpower to the north, Jamaica and their CARICOM brothers should have a unified position.
We should have a unified position, but out of the meeting coming in out of Trinidad, or rather St. Kitts and Nevis, we had security cooperation. We had a lot of other areas that had been highlighted as areas of cooperation for CARICOM. But the foreign policy component, our Prime Minister said, listen, each country is a testing ground for various ideas, and we can use this as a laboratory of sorts to be able to try out various things. We are not individual states coming together, an ever closer union like the the European Union says. We're not like the OECS that has a single currency. We are individual countries that might have individual positions, and we should support them, is what Kamla Persad-Bissessar says. Does that lead to CARICOM being useful any at all then?
And it's certainly the point you just made, the rhetorical question you just raised comes up. What is the purpose of CARICOM at one point or another? Because we saw the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, she made some extreme statements, in my view, in terms of the strikes on the alleged drug traffickers. I think she said blow them out of the water.
And giving her full support to the United States doing that.
The rest of CARICOM in general tend to have a more tempered approach. Now, should CARICOM be saying, no, you don't apprehend drug traffickers or people who are accused of it? No, but there's a way to do it in compliance with law. And Mrs. Bissessar went all the way to what I would call an extreme position in terms of blow them out the water. I mean, just the words alone are just mind-boggling coming from a head of state in CARICOM. We've never had, I don't recall language like that coming out of CARICOM.
She's also said that she's grateful to the U.S. for their help and cooperation, thanked them for the lowering of the crime rate in the country, has given them Tobago to be able to have their radar, a radar that is controversial there in Trinidad and Tobago, and now has said that she will continue to cooperate with the United States, something that other CARICOM countries haven't said. But she's also put it in context that they are closest to Venezuela, have to deal with the bulk of that problem, and the rest of us can say anything that we feel like we don't have to deal with it. Does the reality on the ground of each of these Caribbean countries matter then? Does it change what it is that we have to deal with?
Of course it does, but I'm going to keep saying it again and again and again. She may have a Venezuelan migrant problem, which Jamaica does not. I know that's an issue in Trinidad. It might have caused spikes in crime, etc. Again, there is a way to deal with it. She would have to, in my view, and every country should, comply with law. She cannot go out on a tangent and be calling for extrajudicial killings. So there are nuances in each Caribbean country, but once CARICOM has a unified position that as a matter of principle, we will address everything based on what the law is and not what we want it to be.
Let's take a look at that unified position next as we close out Lead Story Prime here on CVM Television.
Time. There are now 2 due dates for filing final income tax returns. All personal income tax returns, such as self-employed persons, individuals, partners, and partnerships, must file and pay their income tax returns by March 16. For corporate bodies, your income tax return is now due April 15. The due dates for all estimated tax returns filings and quarterly payments remain the same: March 15, June 15, September 15, and December 15. Visit jamaicatax.gov.gm or call 888-TAX-HELP for details. Tax Administration Jamaica, working together to serve you even better.
Hey, what I want? Hi, I am Candy Pang.
What a guan?
What a guan?
That a guan pa.
What a guan?
What a guan? What a guan? Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
That's a guan pa. What a guan?
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winford Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
All right, we've been going through the problem, but we're a solution-oriented show. So we're taking a look at Jamaica's options, and perhaps these options might influence the rest of the Caribbean. Because United Nations Charter speaks of what's called the sovereign equality of all states. Everybody's the same, everybody's equal, supposedly. But international politics is also a world of power. You just heard Christophe make that very clear, and that power has interests that come along with it. Jacqueline Charles, let me pull you in here, because as we have this conversation about what's going on, I want to talk to you, and then I want to talk to Christophe Simpson about this, because from your coverage of Washington, from your coverage of the region, from your perspective there in the United States, as you see how the Caribbean states are trying to figure out what goes on, what's a space that we have? What kind of room do we have? Do we have the ability to make these sorts of nuanced positions at this time? Or does the world that we live in right now just no longer make space from that, as the United States expects different things from Caribbean states at this moment?
You know, I just keep thinking about divide and conquer. When you're divided, you're easily conquerable. But when you are united, it's very difficult for someone else to kind of force something down your throat, even if they want to, even if they succeed. But I think today, CARICOM really has to ask the question, as my fellow panelists said, what is the purpose of CARICOM if we're all going to go about our own way? Yes, we have to find these sort of nuanced ways and continue with our diplomacy. We have to up our game, but we also have to remember that we're 15 votes. And it can't just be when there's a serious vote at the UN or some other international organization to leverage that. But we really have to start to speak the same language. That's, for me, from covering these issues, that's what I see. But if we start going at it our own way, then it's just very easy for the US, the EU, or whomever to basically just come in and Bigfoot us, including China. Because I asked that question too this week in terms of what's happening here what does that mean in terms of China? And an expert said that, well, the Chinese are telling him that they're loving this because they basically feel now it's going to be fertile ground for them to step in. And does Washington really want to see China have more leverage in its backyard? I don't think so.
And that's been something that has been raised for years now, especially as the Trump administration has pulled out of funding major projects, that this might give more space to China and other interests who might see this as additional room. But Jacqueline Charles, help us out. I've put down here 3 big strategies that we could use. Strategy 1, explicit alignment. Caribbean states just say, listen, we are with you 100%. You move, I move, U.S. That's what makes sense for us. It might reduce our autonomy, but we live to fight another day. Another one, strategic ambiguity. We support everybody. We want everybody to be on the same page. We think everybody should get along. Problematic, though, is that everybody's suspicious of you when you have that sort of let's all sing along song. Third, non-alignment 2.0, saying, listen, this is our defined position. This is our doctrine, if you will, and then we just deal with the consequences with our economic vulnerability as it comes. From your vantage point, given the Trump administration's current position, the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, or what's been called the Donroe Doctrine, do we have space to have any of these or all of these on the table?
What do we want? I mean, at the end of the day, our leaders are there because they were voted into office. And what did the people vote you for? What are your marching orders? And I think that once we start to define what it is that we want, what it is that we need for our nations, then we have something to sit at the table. Let me just take a quick example. A couple of weeks ago, there were the reports about St. Lucia, where the Prime Minister was quoted, or he said it because I heard the speech, where he says that he was told by the United States to remove students from Cuba. I sent a message to the State Department. I said, okay, 1, can you confirm that you guys are pressuring this Caribbean leader to do this? 2, what is the United States willing to do if we cannot send our students to Cuba for scholarships? What are you doing about the medical situation? Because the reality is that we don't have health care, the way we should have it. So we've had to come up with our own systems. I'm not sure I even got an answer to them for that. But these are the kind of questions that if you're being pressured on one end, it's not going out into the public and saying, oh, here's what they're doing to me. What is it that we want? Where do we want to end up to? And then what do you have to sit with at the table? And can you bring others along with you? And if you're going at it alone, then you're just going to walk out empty-handed. But I think that as, CARICOM, it's there. Why does it exist? And we need to just define some commonalities, even while we acknowledge that we all have our, individual, national security or foreign policy needs.
All right, Julie Dabdoob, same question to you. Explicit alignment, U.S., you move, I move. Strategic ambiguity, we all get along, but that makes everybody suspicious. Or non-alignment 2.0, deciding that Jamaica has a doctrine, and no matter what comes, this is what we're standing for. What do you suggest that Jamaica do right now?
Well, I don't think anything is black and white in the world, in my view. I think the position should be issues-based, issues-oriented. So you take a position on an issue based on what the legal position is. So if today doing X is legally acceptable under international law, you support it. If doing X or doing Y is incorrect under international law, then we have to take that position. That has been the Caribbean and Jamaica in particular has always.
So is that strategic ambiguity, like making your way through the waves as things are happening, dealing with issues as they come?
I don't know if you want to call it ambiguity, because it's not ambiguous. You're standing on the correct side of law, as we did in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s with South Africa. There was enormous pressure on Jamaica. Jamaica was one of the voices that swung the anti-apartheid movement.
But we also suffered internally for it. And so this is a question not only to Jamaica having great international standing, we're very proud of that, but internally we suffered. You're looking at a set of Jamaican people after Hurricane Melissa, after Hurricane Beryl, after COVID, now having to face new taxes for the first time in 10 years, now seeing oil prices skyrocket as a result of what's taking place now with Iran, and say to them, listen, great dignity comes with taking positions. Just before we go, because I want to make sure that I have Christoph come in before we end the show.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to go and agitate any superpower or any other country, right? But if you take principled positions without agitating the situation, rather than, and I'll use Jamaica as an example, not only do you change your, talking about the Israeli issue now, you change your position, you vote in the UN against international law. When you come under pressure, you abscond from your votes, and you not only support certain positions which you traditionally did not, you go and cozy up with a colonizing country. Just hear me out.
No, well, we complete out of time now, so I want to pull Christoph in before we say the amen. Christoph, which one of the three? Explicit alignment, strategic ambiguity, or non-alignment 2.0?
Definitely not number one, because that means...
So not you move, I move US?
Definitely not. That is subordination. Would have to be strategic ambiguity or non-alignment. I don't think that those things... Well, I'd like to think that those things won't anger anybody. But when Jalil was speaking, I remember a quote from Michael Manley from the 70s when they asked him why he's angering the US. And he says he's not angering the US, they're angering themselves. Even if you align with international law, if an entity is opposed to international law, they're going to try to hit you back as well. I mean, we've seen how the US treats countries that wanted to take Israel to the ICC and the ICJ. We've seen that. We've seen how they've sanctioned the ICC. But yeah, strategic ambiguity might be the safest bet for our survival, but taking an approach, taking a policy of strategic ambiguity doesn't mean we should be ambiguous with ourselves about where we stand.
So maybe it is that then we need to define for ourselves internally where we are, even as we navigate internationally what's going on. We're completely out of time though here inside the show, but let's just close off by saying in international law, every state is equal. That principle is written into the United Nations Charter, but international politics is not written in law only. It's also written in power. For small states like Jamaica, the challenge is not simply to assert sovereignty, it's to navigate a world where powerful states possess far greater leverage. Christoph Simpson, Jacqueline Charles, and Jalil Dabdoo, thank you so very much for joining us inside another edition of Lead Story Prime. I'm Jodianne Quarry, and on behalf of the entire CVM production team, thank you for watching Lead Story Prime. Have a fantastic evening, and I hope you stay safe. Up next, Fan Central.
Tune in to Lead Story, weekdays at 6 p.m. Hosted by Jodianne Quarry.
Brought to you by
Horizon, a new loan product from Access Financial Services.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
I'm Curlin Brown. Let's continue to inspire Jamaica. And of course, where else will you see it? CVM TV, of course.